Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. For a conversation on the current state of Nigeria's power sector and the expected way forward, we are now being joined from our Abuja studio by Rumundaka Wonodi, the first Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading PLC. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you for honoring our invitation. Now, let's start with the news, the good news from the Minister of Finance, that the World Bank has approved a loan of about $3 billion for expansion of transmission and distribution in the Nigerian electricity sector. At the same time, the CBN, Central Bank of Nigeria, and the National Electricity Regulatory Commission are also talking about some 600 billion naira that will be made available to the value chain, the electricity sector value chain. These developments, are they necessarily good, or you think that we do not, the distribution companies and the generating companies will not have the capacity to manage more resources, given their records?
Well, I must say that both news are they're very welcome. One of the issues facing the sector right now is liquidity, which means that there is not enough money to finance the sector or to pay for all the services within the sector. As you know, there has been issue of cost-reflective tariff, which means that there's a tariff gap. And I think that the CBN money is to address that. It's more like a subsidy to the market that runs from this year to middle of next year. But one other thing that is also been a big problem to the sector is the fact that we do not have capacity throughput across the value chain. So you look at gas, and then you have generation, which actually outstrips both transmission and distribution. And what we found out is that, without making the necessary investment in transmission and distribution, we will always be with some stranded capacity and will never do anything north of 4,500 megawatts that it's commonly done when we have some good days. So it's important and it's very welcome to see that $3 billion coming and go directly into transmission and distribution. That is more important than actually providing subsidy support to the industry.
And how likely do you think it is for the government to really achieve this? And I say this because even recently in the news, we've seen reports about the MOU with Siemens for us to produce 25,000 megawatts of electricity, but currently the national grid can only take about 11,000 megawatts of electricity. So clearly there is a lot to do in that aspect. Are you hopeful that we're going to be able to achieve this, to really maximize the potential of a lot of the funding that's coming into the power sector right now?
I think, in all essence, I think that this loan, because when we saw the budget for 2020, the first thing that struck us was that, it just had 126 billion for the power sector. So the question is, the government has made this announcement, this initiative to expand the networks through the electrification roadmap with Siemens, and we were asking, where is the funding coming from? We expect that the Germans will fund some of this program, but we expected to see something coming from the government. So this $3 billion, in essence, gives teeth to that initiative. So it's very welcome. I think what you're alluding to is now project implementation and the plans for that. That is very key. It's very important that the expansion is done along the routes that will give the most benefit to the market. It should not be political. And therefore, we would expect that the system planning will be domiciled within an independent body like the system operators, which currently is under TCN, but holds a separate license. Our preference is to actually see that entity pulled out of TCN and placed closer within the market, where the stakeholders, distribution companies, generation companies, the bulk trader, will be able to oversee its activities and its recommendations for system improvement.
Well, I mean, earlier on, you referred to cost-reflective tariff. And yesterday we had on this same program the spokesperson for the discos, and he expressed concern about cost-reflective tariff, and that unless tariffs are cost-reflective, the bulk trader has no basis for complaining that the biggest threat to the value chain is the failure of the distribution companies to make monthly remittances as due. For, I mean, as we see, even now, the discos are owing the bulk trader over 1 trillion naira. How important is this issue of cost-reflective tariff? Is it about tariff, or we should put more emphasis on service delivery?
I think there are two parts to it. Definitely, the total cost of provision of a service should be transferred to the market, and the consumers should pay that. But on the other side is that, you know, the cost of service must come with also a level of service, right? So that just saying that it costs $10,000 to produce electricity or whatever does not mean that the value that it gets to the consumers is the same $10,000. It's important that, you know, the tariff has an outcome for the consumer. And this is something that we've continued to argue that, you know, it should come with a level of service. If you pay 30 naira, it should translate to maybe 6 hours of electricity within a known period so that you can plan or have a predictable service. Without that, I think it's meaningless and it will not drive compliance. And even if you raise that, I doubt that the discos will be able to meet that. So they have a lot of work to do. In terms of level of service, I believe that once we have predictability of service, then it will drive compliance in payment. And, you know, you go around the world and you find out that countries where you have the highest compliance in tax payment are the ones where, you know, the taxes do the most work. It's not putting the marshals out there that make people compliant. It's people seeing that there is a benefit to the service that's been provided. So 6 hours of electricity while I'm at work, and then I come back in the evening and there's no power in my house is totally meaningless to me. But if I know when it's coming, then maybe I could plan around that, and then that power is meaningful to me, saved me running my generator or alternative service, and then I'll be willing to pay for that.
Let me ask you a question with regards to the GENCOs, because there seems to be a major concern from GENCOs that the power purchasing agreements that they have with NBET is not sufficient enough, because NBET claim that they don't get enough in from the discos. And this takes us back to the general regular question of why the government is still in control of the transmission side of the power sector, because it seems as though things may run more efficiently if we were to privatize that and just have it regulated. What is your take on this?
Well, so you have the 11 distribution companies. 10 of them have been privatized, and we're still struggling with the regulation of those ones and bringing them in line.
No, I was talking about transmission. I was talking about the transmission side of things.
I'm trying to put this in context, right? I'm trying to put this in context. So you have those, and you have 10 distribution companies that have been privatized. One of the things of the benefit is that at least you can even benchmark one to the other. You can say ECO is doing much better than Ikeja, or Ikeja is doing better than ECO, what have you. Now, if you go privatize the transmission company right now, a huge monopoly, I think you have to really wonder whether we're at that point. Concessioning, management contract, but I'm not sure that you want to privatize it fully in terms of selling out all the shares. One other thing that might be, that could be a solution is to warehouse that a company within a government entity that could actually drive its development. Countries like Singapore had actually taken their transmission grid and put them in their sovereign wealth fund so that, you know, with some funding, it could leverage its assets and bring in additional funders to expand the network. That is something that you can do. And then when you do that, you have a professional management company to do that. I don't think that transferring it to the private sector fully is what is called for at this moment.
Well, there's so much blame game in the electricity industry. I mean, the discos are blaming the bulk trader. The bulk trader is blaming the discos. Everybody is blaming the regulatory commission. What exactly is the problem? Is there a problem with the structure of the industry? And if so, what do you think can be done?
Well, you know, we have a new leadership that is coming to the sector, and one of the things that we had actually observed is that there has been a leadership gap within the sector. And what I mean is that the alignment of, say, first, the government agencies, and then they have to come together to work with the private sector. But where within the government you find agencies that differ, the bulk trader, the TCN, and NERC holding different positions, it's very unhealthy. So first, there's leadership, but the bigger issue and the more that you hear every day is that between the transmission company and the distribution companies regarding load rejection and ability to deliver power where is required. And within the structure of the industry, I've talked about this, there is the system operator that when merged with the market operator form the independent system operations. And if that body were to be neutral as it was envisaged, as the Jonathan administration had pushed it at the time by creating the ISO and appointing executives, then that body could be neutral enough to tell exactly whether it's the transmission company or the distribution company that is holding up the delivery of power to homes and businesses. But as it is now, that company sits within the TCN, and its independence makes it very injurious to the industry, and or its lack of independence does not allow it to play a pertinent role that is designed for it within the industry. So, you can reduce the blame game by having the independent system operator become truly independent and play a neutral part. And then, for the government, I think they have to align and make sure that its agencies speak with one voice, and therefore there is no confusion about what the policies are, what the regulations are, and where the government is planning to take the industry to.
Okay, so we are going to go on a very quick commercial break now, and when we're back, we'll continue this conversation with you. Do stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still in our Abuja studios with us is Mr. Rumundaka Wonodi, the first chairman of the Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trading Company. Welcome back to the program, sir. Thank you for staying with us. Now, when I took you up on the question with regards to the privatization, you mentioned the likelihood of a monopoly arising from that. So I'd like to lay out a hypothetical situation to you, and I'd like you to let me know what you think about this situation and whether you're opposed to it or whether you're for it. So let's say this were to be the case, and then NERC, the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, was then put in place to basically just regulate everything, but no antitrust laws were also ensured, so that there was no monopoly in this particular situation. What would the role of the Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trading Company be if the government were to hypothetically do that? And then is this something that you would be opposed to? So we have some antitrust laws in place, or rather ensuring no antitrust laws to ensure that we can actually make sure there's no monopoly here. What would your take be on this situation?
Well, so the question is,
if the government is to fully privatize and leave NERC to regulate, that's the question. So if the government were to fully privatize and leave NERC to regulate, but ensure no antitrust laws to avoid a monopoly, what would then be the role of the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company? And how would you then see this situation?
I don't think that privatization of transmission affects the mandate of the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company. There are two different things that are unrelated. What the transmission company does is to provide service, which is access transmission of electricity from one point to the other. So where the bulk trader buys its power either at the power plant and delivers it to the distribution substation, or it buys and sells at the same point, does not affect its its role. The only thing that would happen is that, the bulk trader takes some certain risks in its contract between generation companies, which to a large extent covers the misdeeds or whatever the transmission company does. And therefore, and it does that because the transmission company is government-owned. If that were to change, then the bulk trader might not cover the risk of transmission and will transfer that to either the generation company or totally to the distribution company. So that is one part of that. But the other part about antitrust is just to say that the structure of the industry is significantly different from a marketplace. There is an asset that you cannot replicate, does not make sense to replicate. It's like having the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway and just going and building parallel to that. It's unhelpful. What you want to do is that the provision of service, what is existing, that is optimized the best of ways. So I don't think that antitrust is what will manage that, but it's the fact that, when it's a monopoly, it's quite difficult to manage, and then the only other way to do that is either you take over the license or you drive out the investor out of the company, which I'm not sure that we've gotten to where it is. And there is one other thing to say about the transmission company. It's developmental to some extent. It's not only finances that drive it. Economics and socioeconomics might drive its development, where the government has plans to maybe extend service because it has a projected plans for a certain area. So there are so many things. While you cannot go out right now and say that you want to privatize the transmission network. However, there is something that you can do. You can reduce the sphere of influence of the transmission company. Currently, anything that is above 33 kVA within our system, that particular line is handled by the transmission company. It is possible to allow that 132 kV lines could be managed by other distribution companies or generation companies to direct their load to service points, and then let the transmission company take care of 330 and the supergrid whenever it comes. That could be one way to reduce its hold in the industry and diversify ownership or control of a transmission network.
Well, you talked about tariff earlier, but let me ask the same question from another dimension. Recently, the Electricity Regulatory Commission gave the DISCOs 60 days deadline within which they should give reasons why their licenses should not be revoked. The DISCOs were accused by NEC of violating the Electricity Power Sector Reform Act, particularly with regard to the review of the multi-year tariff order between 2016 and 2018. Now, do you think revoking the licenses of the DISCOs would necessarily help the industry? Will it be the best option for sanctioning, errant DISCOs?
Well, I think it's something that is provided within the law. The regulator specifically talked about the Section 74 of the Electric Power Sector Reform Act. So, and it says that if an operator is not meeting its terms and conditions of license, that the regulator could ask him within 60 days to provide reasons why it's not able to do that, and failure could lead to revocation of license. So it's just the law, and the regulator is working along the law. I don't know, but one thing that to say is that people cannot fail to meet the obligations of their license and then think that it could never lead to revocation of license. So if that is where it gets to, then it gets there. But the thing is that the process has to be fair, it has to be diligently prosecuted, and then before you get that, it shouldn't be done based on a rash decision. And I think that the regulator is laid the line or the pathway towards that. But something to say about this is that, we don't know what exactly the details of what is causing the DISCOs not to meet that. There are different perceptions that Maybe they're just not working hard enough. Maybe there is different behavior. People just do not want to meet their target. And the federal government has been funding this industry, providing subsidy or grants or loans, 700 billion first, then another 600 billion. So I think that what the government is indicating is that it will not be funding this sector, just putting money without the commensurate results coming out of it. And, you know, for people going into other aspects of project development or trying to make investment in the sector, in generation, in meters, in transformers, in cables, and what have you, if it seems like the distribution companies cannot collect or remit or make payments as required, then the system is not bankable. So it's important that, you know, they work out exactly what that means, and so that people can actually rely on distribution companies to provide that. So if there is issue with the tariff or whatever it's in the MITO, I think the 60 days is time enough for them to begin the conversation. But definitely, I think it's unhealthy that the government continues to put money or that operators are not able to meet their targets, whether generation or distribution company, as even the transmission company, the regulator must step up and do what it needs to do.
The targets must be met. And that is why there are also proponents who are talking about breaking up the national grid and creating state grids and allowing states to actually have a mandate to be in control of their own electricity, stopping the reliance at national federal level once again, and also ensuring that states can add more to their own IGR too. What is your take on this notion of developing state grids to break up the national grid? Is this something that you're for or something you're against?
Like I spoke earlier, to the extent that you could allow states or distribution companies or anyone to own 132 kVA lines, then you can form a network of your own. But, you know, so when you say state grid, do you mean that it will be isolated from the national grid? That is not the most helpful for stability of system. Are there grids where you can do something? The electricity, the disco in itself, it's a grid of its own. It's a grid of 33 kV, 11 kV, and 415 volt lines, right? So it's a grid on its own. It could form its own market area. I think that one of the things that would be helpful and we want to see is that states can actually, within its footprint, create a tariff jurisdiction or whatever you have where they can invest and then work with the distribution companies to increase supply and ring fence that in such a way. But one way or the other, it will still have to be connected to the grid in a physical form.
No, state-owned
I think
grids.
that when people talk about, state-owned grid could be. The distribution companies, like I said, are already a grid of their own and is being controlled by the DISCOs. So within those footprints, the state could actually ring fence its own, make investments, and then put embedded generation. I think that the structures are within the market, and it's for people to just develop it a little bit further.
Well, Wonodi, we'll need to take another short commercial break. We'll need to take another short commercial break. Just hold your thoughts. We'll be right back. You're still watching The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. And still with us in our Abuja studio is Rumundaka Wonodi, the first chairman of the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading PLC, also known as the bulk trader. Now, Wonodi, before we went on break, you were commenting on whether or not states should have their own grids, you know, instead of everyone depending on the national grid. You probably want to complete your thoughts on that.
Yes, I was saying that it is possible that if we devolve some of the powers of the TCN in controlling the network, so currently anything higher than 33 kV goes under the remit of the TCN. So even if you were to construct that as a generation company, it would transfer that operations and maintenance to the TCN. So if it were possible to amend the laws so that states, distribution companies, and other operators can actually construct 132 kV lines, then states could use that to move power within their state and stabilize a network. But what I was saying is that there's already a form to that. All you need is to do the market segmentation or cutout to allow that to happen. So that's exactly where I was going with that.
Okay, yes. Let me ask you, I mean, you were in charge of the bulk trader at the time the Jonathan government launched the power sector roadmap, which spells out the strategy, the reform initiative, and all of that. And it's been quite a number of years since then. When you look back, where do you think we have the weakest link? And what can we do to address that weakest link in the electricity supply industry?
Just a little bit of a clarification. I was the managing director, chief executive officer, not the chairman. The chairman was the then Minister of Finance, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala. I was the managing director. Yes. You know, I think that one of the a few places we missed it is investment in transmission, and then the targets for distribution company. We kind of took it for granted that once there is a privatization and there is generation, that distribution companies will automatically make investments in expansion of their networks and what have you. So we focus more on metering. So each time there's a performance agreement being talked about, you keep hearing about the metering targets and metering targets. We did not think about the expansion of the network so that the capacity to receive load is improved over time. Also, when it comes to transmission, the funding for that was not quite looked into. So when we started at the bulk trader, one of the things that we said is that we're not going to sign PPAs with companies that do not have gas supply agreement or would not be easily evacuated by the transmission company. So we made those ones preconditions, conditions precedent to signing a PPA. But, you know, the transmission company will go out and give approval to generation companies, but at the end of the day, there was no funding to actually build the network that is required to evacuate the power plant. So we've been at 11,000 going to 13,000 megawatts, and up to date, we're not able to evacuate. So we should have paid more emphasis on expansion of those networks as part of the privatization targets. I think that is one place that I believe that we did not focus very closely.
Okay. And with this new $3 billion injection into the power sector, the new deals we're hearing about with Siemens, etc., let's be honest, does this administration really have any excuse not to ensure that under its watch we receive 24-hour electricity as Nigerians?
I'm sorry to say that, you know, this 24/7 power cannot come for the whole country at the same time. We have to do this from areas where you have the network in place, and then people are also willing and able to pay for the electricity. I think what is more important that we should focus on is predictable service that will allow people to plan how they live their lives, how they run their businesses. The target of 24/7 electricity requires much more than any administration can handle within 4 years. But they can start the pathway where...
Oh, no, we're talking about 8 years here by the time it gets to 2023. I'm not talking since 2019. They've already had about 4.5 years. So we're going to be talking about 8 years by the time this time frame I've given is up. Is there any excuse for us not to have 24-hour electricity?
No, I'm talking about realistic. You know, I'm talking about where we are today and what we can achieve in 4 years. You know, the 4 years is past. You know where it is today. There is no need going back to what they could have done. And so it's setting the expectations right. What is important, the 24/7, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but this is realistic. 24/7 electricity will take much more. What is important and what you can start doing within next year is to begin to tell consumers when to expect power and how many hours of electricity they can get. And, we all talk about 20 years ago when things were much better, 30 years ago. Most people did not have 24/7 electricity, but most people also knew when power was going to come, and therefore they could plan accordingly. I think that's what's very important, predictable service and not going to the El Dorado world of 24/7. And to be honest, not everyone can afford that service at this moment because of the cost of provision of electricity. So at the tariff rate and how much it costs, not so many people at 30,000 naira per month of minimum wage can actually afford to pay electricity when they're spending 60-70% on food, and then you still have education and other things to tie in there. But they could do very well with 6 hours of service when they know it's going to come, or 8 hours, or for 18-20 for people who can afford to pay that. And I think that's where we should focus. Predictable service.
Now, the present payment arrangement between the distribution companies and the bulk trader is meant to be a temporary arrangement. And what we have seen is that, we have payment defaults resulting in blame game between the bulk trader and the distribution companies. However, the Electricity Sector Reform Act of 2005 envisaged a commercial structure that probably will have, addressed this challenge of absence of payment guarantee. What, in your opinion, do you think is delaying the implementation of that commercial structure in the Act?
Yes, the having a payment guarantee is common within. If you don't have a credit history, then one other way you could bridge that is putting a payment guarantee. And distribution companies were initially required to post LCs, and some of them actually did. And we signed a security deed in 2016, where we pulled together all the LCs of the distribution companies and then assigned them to the generation company. Unfortunately, there was a court case where a judge ruled that the path that NERC took to reviewing the tariff was faulted, and therefore it literally canceled the tariff. Distribution companies went to court and said, well, since the tariff is no more there is no way we can continue to honor the obligations under the LC, and all those things were pulled out. Now, we need to put that back into place, and even when NERC put out this threat of sanction to distribution companies, he did mention that the distribution companies are expected to post letters of credit or some form of payment security in favor of the bulk trader, which they failed to do. But we need to get back to that commercial arrangement, but it will take longer time than it did earlier because a few things have moved, and I'm not sure that the banks, without seeing a payment performance, would go out there and provide these forms of payment security. So it will take some time, but I think that the regulator is right. He has to continue to put pressure on distribution companies to pay what they're required to pay, provided that they have both the tariffs and the enabling environment to conduct their business. That is important too.
And what regulations do you also think the government can also look at passing to attract investors in other types of power and energy, fresher and cleaner types like solar and wind, just general cleaner energies all round? What sorts of regulations do we need to see to have this kind of investment coming into the country?
Well, I think we have enough regulations as it is right now. What is most important is to stay consistent with the regulations and be fair, and then the market will take off. The ones that are already there, so you've signed PPAs with some solar projects, help them and get to financial close so that they start producing. You have also so many generation companies, projects that have been developed. Find a way to get those ones to closure. And then I believe that there is also a support for the REA when it comes to cleaner energy, and they're pushing that. The regulations and the structures are in place. I think it's just to push and be consistent with the policies and continue to create enabling environment, in issues of taxes, and then also allowing imports, maybe some waivers here and there. But, we already have enough green portfolio, at least within the market. We have the large hydros that also green energy, but definitely we have to complement that with non-conventional renewables like solar panels, especially rooftops, for access to electricity in unserved areas.
Well, rural electrification was supposed to be, a major plank of the power sector reform roadmap. But it looks like nobody is talking about rural electrification. All this discussion about electricity supply looks like some kind of elite conversation. What happened to rural electrification? Is it because people in the rural areas cannot afford the tariffs, or what? What, in your opinion, is responsible for this lack of emphasis on rural electrification?
Ironically, I think the Rural Electrification Agency is one that's been doing very well. First, they've changed their model, which is commendable. Before now, what would happen is that the Rural Electrification Agency will be running cables for, say, 50, 100 kilometers to some underserved area where there is a very little load. And the cost of those things, so you go around the country, you see so many abandoned projects where they're trying to extend service to far-flung communities. But the current REA is actually leveraging on technology. So there is a lot of mini-grids development and then rooftop solar that is being deployed around the country. I think they're doing actually much better than before. The REA has done a commendable job in actually increasing electricity access when it comes to rural communities. But it might not be. And I think just yesterday they closed some transactions worth about $350 million from a World Bank facility they're using. So, yes, they're moving there, and I think they've adopted a model that is complementary to new technology instead of what we had done in the past.
Okay, and just before we round up, let me take you back to the topic of the transmissions again and give you another example or another idea. Let's say we were to divide the TCNs across different geopolitical zones, and it wasn't one company. We had several companies that were responsible for different areas. How do you think this would work out? We only have about 30 seconds left.
Well, like I said, you can have small grids that you ring fence. So, for instance, you have the geometric power project in Aba where you have generation and then you have a ring fenced area. Yes, you could do a lot of that and then scale them up and then join them together to have one grid that provides stability. So that could happen. Like I've always said, I don't think that the structures are not in place. What needs to be is that the DISCOs and the state government needs to work together to put that in place. The structures, the provisions within the law could allow that.
Well, Rumundaka Wonodi, thank you very much. That's all we'll be able to take on this segment.